Okay, thank you to Les and David for that presentation. We'll now take questions from the floor. Can we get a microphone to Peter here, please? And could I suggest that anyone who wants to ask a question, if you put your hand up, we can get a microphone to you and we can get the questions stacked in advance. Peter.
Thank you, Anthony. I'd just like to pick up on something that Ken Dalton mentioned about the Mayor of London requiring 20% renewables in buildings in London. First of all, I should make it clear that I don't represent the same organisation as the Mayor of London. We think it's as mad as you do. Now, the tall buildings in London are probably the most sustainable on the planet because we have a temperate climate in London and the highest access to public transport. So before you even build the building, they're probably the most sustainable you can have. That's not to say we can't do better, and of course that means less energy use. And a suggestion I'd like to make is that we send a message back to California. The airplane companies, Boeing, the car companies like Porsche are all putting vast amounts of money and resources into making planes and cars more energy efficient. But computers are the most rapidly increasing source of power in the world. When you look out at an office building at night, the lights have gone out automatically when the people aren't there, but the computers are still on standby. When somebody walks away from their desk during the day, the computers are still on standby. Now, Bill Gates is a very rich man. He wants to help save the planet. So please, let's send a message to Bill Gates. Bill, standby sucks.
Thank you for that, Peter. Ken, did you have did you want to add anything to that, or?
I think what you're really highlighting here is the need for good environmental control and not wasted energy once we've actually got into the building. Unfortunately, we don't control Bill Gates. We will have to let him do his own thing. But there are very, very good solutions where you can actually come up with low energy solutions, even in a very sophisticated required building. So that's the test of the building services engineer.
Okay, next question. No hands?
Silence is golden.
Question at the front here, please.
Thank you very much for an interesting presentation to the panel. Yesterday we heard that there was what I found to be an unbelievable figure of 2 fatalities, and one was a construction worker and one was an apparent suicide. For my interest, I'd like to hear from Ole and David as to whether or not they've got any figures on the safety record of their buildings.
Okay, just for the speakers who are here at the podium who weren't here yesterday, to clarify, EMAR confirmed yesterday that on the Burj Dubai project they'd only had 2 fatalities on site during construction. So I think the question is, how many fatalities have you had on the CCTV building and the Shanghai World Financial Center? Ole?
We actually had no fatalities on the CCTV building until today. So, and actually, if you look at the site, it's an incredibly well-organized site, which we have to pay a lot of respect to the Chinese contractors that are running it, and we've been very lucky that far.
David?
On the Shanghai Financial Center, I believe there was 1 fatality, and similar to Burj, it actually happened on the lower floors. I think a worker was leaning against some concrete blocks that had not yet set and tipped over. There was also 1 fire which occurred at the upper levels of the building. This was caused by a welding fire that ignited some rubbish lying around. So I think the lesson is you can plan for all sorts of contingencies, but ultimately that there is a human factor to it, and unfortunately these fatalities seem to occur out of carelessness.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Question in the middle here, please.
Hello, Ben Piper from Atkins Global. I was just wondering if there had been any consideration in both of the projects presented here in terms of their recyclability. There was quite an interesting talk from Werner Sobeck about the way materials could be put together in ways that could, at a later stage, be easily separated. Just wondering if that's entering into the design considerations.
Well, everyone's looking at me for some reason.
You're on.
The nature of the structural systems of most, I guess all major buildings are either structural steel or reinforced concrete. I probably don't have to tell you that those elements will last a very, very long time. How long, I don't really know, but let's say easily, if modestly maintained, several hundred years. So on the other side of the coin, if there is a need to recycle them, the structural steel, of course, all in today's world, all gets recycled back into the mill and becomes new steel products. Concrete's another matter again. The reinforcing steel, again, recycled, but the cement is not, in fact, recyclable product, as far as I know. Sometimes the material is used as aggregate in roadbeds and in other uses, but it's not a heavily recyclable product. I think the larger issue, however, is not the structure, but in the non-structural components.
I guess that's my cue to say something. Well, as a facade material, glass is very good because, of course, it can be recycled. In Shanghai now, unfortunately, though, they're changing the code to try to restrict the amount of glass on buildings to 50%. I think more in reaction to a lot of these, green and gold and copper buildings that are spreading out in China. But I think, if you were to think about a facade, a glass facade, is very environmental.
I think in a way what was said obviously counts for both projects equally. CCTV is a steel structure, and with that, on the side of the steel, obviously recyclable, but I also think that indeed, compared to the actual lifespan of materials or the serviceability or maintenance expectancy of materials plays the larger role. And I think there is still a kind of very dangerous tendency in China specifically at this point, which is to silicone absolutely everything. It seems to be the magic glue that from the building envelope creeps to the inside of the buildings, and you can see wood-to-wood paneling on the inside spaces very often in China siliconed. And I think this is maybe one of the major battles to fight. For example, I've started our initial meeting with the interior contractors with a series of proclamation of rules to say there will be no silicon joint anywhere on the interiors. I think there is some hope, but also a long way to go.
I think that question's popped up twice about recycling. I think it's a fascinating subject. I think there could be a fantastic student PhD or something out there actually looking into designing a completely recyclable tall building. It'd be a tough challenge. If anyone wants to fund that, I've got a good student in mind, by the way. So, are there any other questions from the floor? Question at the back there, please.
I have a question for Leslie Robertson. Were the dampers always a part of the scheme for the tower, or were they only added after the tower increased in height and you needed to reduce the weight of the tower?
For the Shanghai World Financial Center, ultimately two TMDs were installed in the project. In fact, we studied the issue with considerable care and came to the conclusion that it would be appropriate to leave space should there be a need for dampers, but the dampers were not in fact required either for increased seismic resistance or to reduce swaying motion in the wind. So I think it was it's sort of part of the Japanese philosophy, and dampers were in fact installed. We did do a joint probability study of the reliability of a damper versus return period of windstorms to convince ourselves that electrically powered damping systems that were, let's say, 90% reliable, which would be a terrible performance, so any damper is at least 90% reliable, that they could be considered as essentially 100% reliable in terms of evaluating the strength of the building. Although those of you who work in high-rise buildings know that strength is really the modest part of our design. It's all about the performance.
There's a question in the middle here, please.
Yes, it's a question, Ali Bouziri, architect, and a question to Ole Scheeren about the public accessibility of the CCTV. I mean, you are basically trying to have the public getting in the building and as such making it more public amenity. Is there a possibility for such a mega project to be, let's say, a roof accessible and have some project bringing in the public on top of the building and using urban spaces approach to buildings like the one you're proposing?
I think that indeed I chose today to present the building not as a series of technical achievements, which we could have as well done. We could have talked about facade performance, central building services, the efficiency of the owner-occupier management of the building. We could have talked also about the accessibility of the building in terms of building a direct underground connection of the tower to the new subway network that is being built in Beijing in order to encourage people to use public transport, etc., etc. I chose not to do that, and I did not do that because I wanted to put a very different emphasis on the presentation. I wanted to do that because I think that to consider sustainability as a merely technical or performative issue in that sense might be a very important point indeed to consider and to keep on elaborating, but maybe not the only point. And I think the sense of sustainability indeed needs to be also considered in terms of a public responsibility, a responsibility vis-à-vis the city and vis-à-vis the public domain, and vis-à-vis the way that people ultimately inhabit and use buildings. So in our case, to subject the building to an openness and with its own internal 24-hour operation as a media station and not as a building that actually operates over certain hours a day and then is entirely dead, I think is a very important component of that, and through that also to speak in terms of the contents of it and the transparency that emerges not through the typical part of the architectural discourse of transparent facades, but indeed through access and experience of a building.
Okay, I think we've got time for one final question in the front here.
Just a question on the CCTV building. I'm interested if you could just elaborate a little bit on the use of the space, efficiency in people movements. I guess it's got to change the way people think about circulating in a loop. We're used to vertically thinking about vertical or horizontal planes rather than this three-dimensional building that you've created. Were the studies done to understand the efficiencies of the user, etc.?
Maybe the most blatant way, if you're asking about efficiency of circulation in the building, there may be two aspects. One that I mentioned previously, the fact that everything is connected to each other two ways, obviously means that you can always choose which path to go one is faster, the other might be connected to other points of the building that you might need to pass along your way. But if we're talking about efficiency of circulation, maybe the best numeric proof of that would be if we consider a building in terms of its escape times, for example. How fast can you evacuate a building? And that obviously is also an important aspect of its environmental safety, if you like, of what it has to offer. And we could prove that in our building, compared to accommodating the same gross floor area in a twin tower or a mega single tower scenario, that our building exits in about 2/3 of the time of a twin tower and half of the time of a single tower. That obviously also reflects back to the actual distances you have to pass in terms of circulating, and that ultimately you can imagine without a catastrophic event as well as a proof of efficiency for a regular circulation.
Okay, and with that I will draw this session to a close. Could we have a final round of applause for the 4 speakers today? Thank you.